this week's episode of the Mayn Idea Podcast, where today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Richard Bresler. A quick reminder to the fans of this podcast, if you enjoy these episodes, please take 30 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. This helps the show generate organic growth and allow me to continually bring on amazing guests. Also, there are now timestamps in the show notes, so feel free to jump around to the segment that interests you most, although I recommend listening to the episodes in their entirety. Richard Bresler is widely recognized as the first American student of Gracie Jiu Jitsu, which is detailed in his book, Worth Defending, How Gracie Jiu Jitsu Saved My Life, which Richard and I discuss on this podcast. For nearly 20 years, he worked closely alongside Jorge and Gracie, helping to grow Jiu Jitsu from the Gracie garages in Southern California to the early days of the UFC. Richard has a unique perspective on the gentle art, and I can admit his wisdom, as demonstrated through this conversation, has worn off on me. He has permanently impacted the way that I think about jiu-jitsu, its philosophy, and the applications of self-defense. Without the love and spirit of the Gracie family and practitioners like Richard, it's very difficult to say where the art of jiu-jitsu would be today. Without further ado, Richard Bresler. Awesome. Well, Richard, thank you so much. No one who's listening now will get to entertain the fact that we just spent 15 minutes trying to figure the audio out. So thank you for being a black belt in technical difficulties. And thank you for taking the time to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I finished the book. It was an awesome read as someone who is enthralled in the journey of jiu-jitsu. And one thing that just stuck out to me a lot throughout this whole story that I'd love to hear your insights on is the level of mastery that you've been around for so long with the growth of jiu-jitsu in the United States, your integral part in that directly, and exposure to Horian and the Gracie family, and then also yourself now, having been doing this for 40 years. I mean, you are a master among a small group of people in the United States that has that type of experience. So what does mastery mean to you?
It's a nice word. You know, first of all, I put it up on my screen too, so we both.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, there we go.
The whole thing with mastery, it's. I don't know if you ever really master something, because mastering something means you're constantly practicing what you've been doing. Because if you don't practice, you lose a certain part. But what I have mastered, the closest thing to me, what's become most important to me, is to pass what I've learned on. Because the further you get from the people like Horian and Boys, Hicks, and the family, the more diluted it seems to be getting.
In terms of technique and application?
In terms of what the real reason that they came here to share, jiu-jitsu. Right. They came to share an art. And it's kind of becoming a sport.
Right.
And so it's kind of hard to, I'm focusing on mostly mastering my teaching, because that's what's needed the most. Yeah. To get people and keep people interested that aren't the athletic type.
Right.
Because jiu-jitsu, the way it was introduced to me, is you don't need strength, speed, coordination. It's something that the average person can do. And it's become the sportive thing that, like, oh yeah, I want to get out there and compete. And I'm not really drawn to those type of students, and they're not drawn to me.
Well, that was one thing that was powerful for me reading the book. It was interesting. I felt like a lot of the book you were speaking directly at me, because I come from the other side of it. I come from an athletic background, growing up competing in skiing, and then a life as a personal trainer, and then finding this sport, right, where I
It's
can
art.
go and put all the things to the test is what it felt like. And
Right.
in the very beginning of jiu-jitsu, I mean, everyone has that story of, you at the waterbed and going over to Horian's house and sitting in your car just in tears, and this guy coming up to you and being like, hey, I'm going to help you out. And that pivotal moment, I had a moment like that too, where I was humbled. It challenged everything that I thought I knew about who I was as a person, as an athlete, toughness, grit, all that stuff, because someone a fraction of my size just absolutely dominated me for 15 minutes. And I walked out of there going, I need to know more about whatever the hell that was. And as I went through, I learned more that there was this big lesson for me to unathlete myself, because it only served me so much in my abilities, because there was tension and aggression and all these things tied to athleticism that are very applicable in a sport arena. And I had to begin to try to undo that so that I could get the art part of it and actually understand how to calm down, how to breathe, how to understand where my body was in space, these kind of things. And it never even dawned on me, especially until I read your book, how instrumental this self-defense aspect was and basically should be, because it gives the smaller guy, maybe the person who doesn't play sports, doesn't have that level of confidence, an opportunity to truly protect themselves in the world. And I felt after reading it like maybe there is a big part that we're missing. How do you get that messaging that seems to be something that really did come up from Brazil with the Gracies and was the pinpoint of what you were all teaching and learning back then? How do you get that to still spread now with the growth of flow grappling and ADCC and how big the UFC is and how many athletes and people there are coming into this sport now? Because it seems important to maintain that.
It is. And I think awareness is the first thing. And I think the book has really helped, because the book has helped. And what you had said, like you made a comment about like it spoke directly to you or something to that effect. I've had so many people reach out, especially at higher levels, that have said the same thing. And one of my neighbors, I told him my book, and he said something to me. I saw him like a couple weeks later, and he goes, "Wow, Richard," he said, "that was so deep, and you were so vulnerable when you wrote that." And I said, if you talk to me out in the street, you meet me, or at jiu-jitsu school, or wherever it is you meet me, that's the same way I'm going to be. In other words, I do best with one-on-one conversations because I'm looking for an intimate kind of exchange with a person.
Right.
So since I had private classes, I mean, for years, with arguably the best teacher in the family, that's how I learned to do jiu-jitsu. So I do that privately and in a group class, and when people reach out and talk to me. I mean, it's one of the things that I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was kind of like struggling with where I was going, what I was doing, who I wanted to be. I got pretty sick. And this is after I was in jiu-jitsu. And one of the things that I went to this chiropractor's office, and he treated me, and I noticed in his office he had a bunch of audio cassettes. You know, back in my day, they had these little cassette things they put in a music player. Anyways, they were from a club that was, and he had a lot of self-improvement things. And it said, and I started listening. I borrowed some from him, and then I joined this club, and I started listening. And the theme was, find something you love and then find a way to make a living at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, well, gosh, I'd love to teach jiu-jitsu, but I'll never be good enough. And then I remember when I got my first class before I was certified, I was a semi-private class. And then I got in the first group of, there were 4 of us through this instructor certification. And I said, this was it. And so I haven't changed the way that I've done things. And because it is done sportively on such a huge arena right now, that I have changed. Like, I wrote down what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to teach jiu-jitsu. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I want to do it. Now I realize what my next, and almost maybe the meaning for my life right now, is to share what was taught to me. And so there's over 1 million people doing jiu-jitsu worldwide, correct?
Yeah.
Easily?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so, and we've sold maybe 3,500 books, audio, whatever. I have a huge market of people that I want to reach, to tell them as far as what was done, whether they can do it or not. At least I'm planting the seed with them, just to say, look, this is what was done, and I want to do my best, my little part, to share that with as many people as possible. So
I mean, the book, it's a great place to start, because it does, it made me, I've been on this journey of doing jiu-jitsu and falling in love with it, and loving and looking forward to traveling to different places in the world and finding a school to go and train at while I'm there, and the community and meeting people. And reading this, certain parts really made me think differently about how I think about, or how I go into training. Because like I mentioned earlier, I've grown up not liking to lose. I want to win at everything that I do. And it's a hardwired mindset, right? It's one that I'm aware of, but it's there, and it drives a lot of what I do and how I do it. And when that competitive nature is always brought onto the mats, you can tease yourself into thinking that you're constantly improving when you're winning. But it's a terrible approach for 2 reasons. One, you won't see opportunities to learn and get better, especially as you build habits to get better at winning. So you'll just repeat the same things to get the same result, the quote better you get. But the other thing that this made me think a lot about is the other students that are there, or the person that might be in their first month of ever trying this out. Or, the mats are so beautiful because everyone checks their baggage at the door and they're there, but that doesn't mean that, you don't get the backstory of why someone might be there. They might be there for some really serious reasons, that they've been really bullied at work, or, someone picks on them in the parking structure at work when they're leaving every single day, or something that's trailing from childhood. And they're not going to stand up on a pedestal and tell everyone that before class starts. So if you ruin their opportunity to fall in love with this and find consistency, as a more experienced person, you're actually doing a disservice to the person who's trying to learn and get better and get involved. And so it really did. I was surprised at how much it shifted the way that it made me want to approach aspects of my training. And I think that is a place where, like, mastery, it can be that exact thing. Your relationship to your ability to communicate values of the sport to people that are trying to understand it.
Yeah.
Values of the art that people are trying to understand.
Yeah. You said something important, that you said you don't know why anyone else comes in the door. You know why you came in the door. But a lot of people come in the door. Lately, probably the past few years, I'm starting to attract more women to come into my class. And the women and I'm not getting, like, or should I say, very rarely get like that. I have one woman that comes and trains. She's traveling. She does Pilates I call her like Superwoman because she can roll. She's still a white belt, but she can roll and roll, and she never seems to get tired. And she has a very good attitude, and she stays relaxed. But there's other women that have come. There's another woman that started with me a little more than a year ago, and the one started a few months ago. And the one that started a few months ago came into the center. She took, because they teach stand-up and fitness, you know, she came in for a 2-week trial. And then he said, hey, you know, come take Richard's class. And, you know, and she's, you know, very insecure. I could see it. I could feel it. And we talked after the class. And because like me, I was very insecure. It's like the move that I did, was it right? I mean, oh my God, am I going to get better? Whatever. And so I told her, I said, you know, I wrote a book, and I said, you might like this book. She read my book. She was like, oh my God, it just opened my eyes. And she started taking my class. You know, she bought 2 gis, and she's, you know, and she's doing her best, and you can just see it. And those are the kind of people that really, that I feel best about attracting, because in my opinion, those are the people who need it the most.
Right.
Like me, I needed it. I needed jujitsu. I didn't know I needed it.
Right.
And I also have an attitude of cooperation with the students, because I'm not in a competitive school. I tell people, I said, look, the most important part of jujitsu for me, and I think for a lot of people, is defense.
Yeah.
This is because if you can defend yourself adequately, that'll give you an opportunity to have an offense.
Yeah.
And you also want to make sure when you defend yourself, you're not using your physical attributes.
To save energy.
Yeah, to save energy, and also to learn. Because if you're fast and you're strong and guy goes for a choke and you're just like all these little kind of movements and you're strong and you can power out of it, how can you, and I wrote something like this very similar in my book, how can you show someone else who doesn't have your attributes?
Totally.
So the guys that I've been teaching,
and that's only valuable until you run up against someone who's your equal size and equal physical abilities, right? Because then it becomes who understands the technique the best, who can manage their energy the best, and defend themselves the best to create opportunities to either get up and walk away, get up and leave, or attack a submission or something like that. But if you're always, and this is like, you know, I struggled with this a lot in the beginning. If you're naturally just relying on those physical attributes, and people are smaller than you or something like that, then you get this false sense that you're developing a skill when you're not. You're just overpowering people because, like you mentioned in the book, because they're not as big as you, right? Like size is a big factor. And so that's great until you get to someone who is equal. And so you have to learn that early, because I think that we all do have a responsibility to be teachers in some regard as you advance through and as you learn more, right? Because one, those are your training partners. That's who you have around you, and they have you. So if you're not helping each other get better, then it's not a fair exchange. So learning these things and then being able to apply and teach from a place from like a humble place, not a I'm better than you and you need to listen to me kind of thing.
right, of course.
It is a sport that it's an art form that really does have the opportunity to truly protect someone better than anything else that's around.
Yeah.
And in the book, you have a funny story about a student who you had to ask to leave eventually after repeatedly not heeding your advice on calming down. Do you find that less and less, or do you still see that? It seemed like in the beginning of jiu-jitsu's growth, there was kind of a target on its back, right? And so Orion spent, it seems like a lot of his free time wearing that target and then defending it. And now this sport has grown, but it also has these other applications where people feel like there's a potential future for them within it if they can get to a certain skill level. So do you feel like that still happens from school to school, that you get that machismo approach where someone's really trying to prove themselves or discredit jiu-jitsu?
I think it's less and less. It was very rare that it happened. I mean, it happened very rare in the whole. I've been teaching now for close to 30 years, and I didn't see it happen very much at all. Where I've actually had to, one, I've had to have someone like go easy, but before I've really asked them to leave, very rare. But you still have to remind people, like, that are bigger than their training partners. I've had guys that have come in and they'll want to spar, and they're 50 pounds heavier than their training partners, and they just kind of manhandle them. Right. And I'll go up and say this, and a lot of times I have said it in a class. I go, you know what they call what you're doing, don't you? And he goes, what? I said, it's being a bully. Right. And I said, and I won't tolerate bullies. And so, it kind of, because sometimes telling someone to relax, they don't get it.
You mean like cueing someone to calm down in the...
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Because that's the word that if you go into my class, what's the one word that you'll hear me say over and over again? And the word, people will sit there and go, relax, right. Because it's something that, people have to be reminded. And I just say, look, it's not that it's just the opposite of tense of, so, and I went to, a therapist back in the 80s, and he was an NLP therapist, the most brilliant therapist I've ever been to. His name was Dr. Dossi. I mentioned him in my book.
Yeah, it sounded like he like very kindly put you in your place with open-ended questions. It was impressive.
Yes.
Hearing that section, recalling him just leaving you kind of forced to think about what you're actually asking him.
Yeah. So, and he would say because, I was dealing with that I thought were fears, I told myself were fears. And when he would put me in a different state, he would say, you're calm, relaxed, and alert. So, I'm telling people to relax, but you also, and you want to stay calm, but you want to stay alert to what's happening. And it's like, I was talking to a woman the other day, and I told her, like, I held her wrist. And as I held her wrist, she kept her arm kind of extended. And I said, which means I had the arm. I said, okay, so relax. And she goes, I said, no, relax. And then finally, her arm dropped and my arm dropped with her. I said, that's relaxed. So people don't even know when they're doing something that they're not relaxed. And I just told, there was a guy in my class who has a woman outweighed by, probably easily 70 pounds. And they were rolling. He's a blue belt. She's a white belt. And so I was keeping a good eye on him. And he came in side control and had his arm across her neck. And I took his arm. I tried to lift it up, and he was just like fighting me. And I just looked at him. And I lifted the arm up, and I put it on the other side of her neck. And I said, okay. I said, you have that kind of size on her. So I went with her next, and I said, watch the way I roll with her. And it was just like, I said, so what? And I gave a speech to the class, and I said, people say they think they're relaxed. They kind of have that in their head, but they're not. So I said, this is the deal. When you're rolling with someone who you have that kind of size on, or you're an upper belt, I said, pretend they're your son, your daughter that's about 8 years old, and you're just showing them how to move. If you're a blue belt, you kind of know the gist about how to, and you don't want to hurt this little kid.
Right.
Because she's a white belt. And yes, she goes, I didn't need your help. I said, look, whether you thought you did or not, it's my job to, one, it's going to help him. It's going to make him better. And she'll be able to focus on technique. There's a time when people are going to come and mash you. It's just going to happen. But maybe after you start to develop some skill. So it's constantly reminding them.
Tension is a really interesting thing, I think, psychologically and physically. Like you can, hold a lot of trauma in your life, a lot of tension, a lot of apprehension, that can be linked to lack of self-confidence. There can just be insecurities in general, and they really magnify when you're on the mat. I mean, you can tell when you're rolling with someone and they have something that they're not dealing with, right? And you can feel it. You can physically feel the tension of them not being able to chill. And this is, here's why I think that everyone should do jiu-jitsu. The self-defense, people who need it for self-defense, but also people that may be aggressive, people that think a lot of themselves, or people that are just interested in picking up a new art form and a new way to stay healthy, is that it will, no matter who you are, it's going to teach you something at some point. And if you're someone who is just tense all the time and don't even know it, it will expose that and show you that there is some onion layers to peel back in this journey towards relaxation. That when you go into a school, right, you can always tell if let's say the belts weren't there, or it was a no-gi day or something like that, and you walked in. Within 5 to 10 minutes of watching people roll, you know who the most skilled people are, one, by what they're doing, but the look on their face, right? That utter relaxation, mouth closed, breathing controlled through the nose, calm in all positions. It's really something spectacular to see, because it's the art form that did that to them. It took them through this journey and brought them to a place where you can stand taller, relax in heightened situations. You talk a couple times about situations like in the street, right? Here's a guy who's highly skilled in jiu-jitsu, right? Learned from the best that have ever done it. Walking across the street, you get in the road rage situation with that guy, and he basically tells you to go fuck yourself. And in that moment, you have the clarity to know that it's not a situation that you should deal with, right? To de-escalate, to try to stay as calm as you can, and then walk away. How valuable is that? To have been taught by this art form to be able to be in that situation and not totally just crumble or do something stupid like get up in the guy's face and try to one-up him. Because you might both go to jail, someone might have a knife, you never know how that's going to go. And it's these lessons on the mat in relaxation and clarity and awareness that allow you to handle that the way that you did. I think it's so cool.
Yeah.
And being able to impart that on your students.
Absolutely. I remember I went over to Gracie Academy a few years ago, and Hiran was talking to a class. I forget exactly where it was, but there was quite a few people in the class. And Hiran was saying, so what happens, guys? You're outside, you're someplace at the beach, whatever, and some guy comes up and pinches your girl's ass. What do you do? And there's always a few guys, go over and kick their ass.
Shit out of him.
Yeah, I'll kick their ass. I was like, okay, what do you do? Yeah, I most of the guys, or at least a few that, they want to escalate. And Hiran says, well, and talks about the things you don't know what's going to happen. And and I realize if this was Brazil, they'd mix it up. You pinch a girl's ass, you know, especially if her boyfriend's there or husband, they're gonna mix it up. They're gonna get into a fight. He says, but we live in one of the most litigious societies ever.
Yeah.
Not to mention whether a person gets sued or not, to have even if you could kick their ass, even if you're a tough guy, even if it's hit on Gracie, he said, look, just because the guy he did something like that because he's ignorant or whatever issue has got him. He says, is it worth it to beat somebody up, to possibly go to jail, to get sued, whatever it is it worth it? You know, and he just said, unless you're being attacked, assaulted, or you're protecting you or your loved one, do your best to walk away. Because when I think I told a story in the book when I, you know, and I just had my hands up as they were talking to the guy.
Yeah.
And before he left, he calls me a punk ass bitch.
Yeah.
And then I thanked him. Which
was such a backhanded comment. I loved that.
Yeah.
Because I knew when I read it, by that point, I hadn't spoken to you yet. But by that point, I had a feeling of your sense of humor or your demeanor, and I could tell that in that moment you definitely said it to him passive aggressively, and I know that hurt him more than the whole thing. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's the only thing I could think of when he said it. I was just like, oh, wow, thanks.
Yeah. Well, you do a good job in the book of being transparent and honest about your relationship to fear, just in general, like through your whole life, despite this. It's not a panacea, right? Jiu-Jitsu. And you, even in that moment, you talk about the fear that you felt, right? You had this conversation in your head of like, oh my, you know, I'm a X degree black belt. I should totally handle it. But there's still that fear. That's something that I think people they're not willing to address, especially if you're like a macho person, right? And it's not to promote weakness or something, but like it's okay to be afraid sometimes, and then to use that fear to either learn or to change your behaviors.
The first time after doing jiu-jitsu, when it first came to me, I was working for Horian a couple days a week when he was selling his in-action videos. And my job, you know, was to go to his house, take the videos to the post office, you know, and drop them off at the post office. And I remember one time I was in the post office and I caught this woman that was in there with her boyfriend. Our eyes caught each other. So, and the guy saw me looking at his girl, but she was looking at me, so I was just returning, you know. And he goes, "What are you looking at?" And I said, "I'm looking at her." And I don't even know what he said after that. And I felt like, dude, she's with you. What, you know?
Yeah.
And, but I remember that my whole body, I was a purple belt, and I kind of I could feel like that fight or flight thing coming on. I didn't run away, but I got my whole body and I remember going back to Horian and saying, "Dude, I don't think I deserve a purple belt." Why? He says, "Well, I told him the story," and I said, and I was scared. And he goes, "Richard, you know, every time I fight, I'm scared."
Yeah.
But it didn't stop me from getting in the ring. He said, "Did you run? Did you freeze?" I said, "No, I just," he said, "Okay." He said, it's a natural thing. Like, and Dr. Dacia, you know, when I talked to him, and he just said, "Look, you go up on a mountain and go up to a cliff, you're going to have a healthy respect or fear about getting too close. So it's just, it's something that I thought would be erased when I got to that certain level, because in my mind I went, well, these guys, this jiu-jitsu, man, they kick anyone's ass. They're not afraid. Right. And it made me realize that, and then I remember I talked to Hickson about the same thing. He told me the same thing. So, it's just something that a lot of people don't even realize that they have fear. I mean, how many times you probably hear it in movies, or you may even talk to somebody. What are you afraid of? I'm not afraid of anything. Right. Yeah, okay, sure. Hope that works for you. But
I think what was interesting for me before I did jiu-jitsu was that I would hear about it, and this is strange that I would hear this from a lot of the people that would talk to me. Is they'd be like, "Oh, if it ever jumped off, people wouldn't even know what hit them," kind of thing. And this is coming from people that were training actively, having that white belt bravado confidence about what they're doing. I mean, still to this day, like I train 4 times a week. I absolutely love it, and every day that I go in, I learn more about what I don't know. I honestly think than what I do know. And what I've come to the conclusion at this point in my journey, and I plan on doing this for the rest of my life, like I said, I love it, is that regardless of being physically fit and athletic and training nonstop, I don't want anything to do with an altercation. I just don't. It's not like the risk reward is so skewed in the wrong direction from a legal standpoint, but also just how much you don't have on who the other person is when you meet anybody, right? There's people that you know for your whole life and then find out things about them you didn't know. So you're going to roll the dice on this interaction with one person who you know nothing about, and you're going to assume that whatever skills you possess are going to weigh more than theirs in an adrenaline-filled situation. Adrenaline to the degree to which you would never experience on the mats because of the uncertainty. When you train with your fellow jiu-jitsu practitioners within the confines of an academy, there's a degree of safety that you just get. There's a professor there. You don't want to truly hurt each other unless maybe you have some vendetta against somebody else and you guys got to hash that out anyway. But if you're in a parking lot, if you're in a shopping center, if you're walking down the street, if you're on the road and someone cuts you off and you push that down the line to this place where you're chest to chest, it is a complete dice roll.
Yeah.
And it must have been really interesting seeing Horian delivering this messaging to you, someone who is probably more primed than anybody else to receive it to the level that you did, right? From the confidence, the drug use, the need for self-defense, all these things, he's giving you exactly what you need. But at the same time, Horian's also representing the physical fight aspect of it on the daily to people that are coming in as boxers, as Kempo fighters, as karate guys, as challenging him to an actual fight where in some cases, as he said, he had to repeatedly defend himself to the same person in short amounts of time. How did you absorb those two things coming at you? Getting the true aspect of the art of jiu-jitsu, but then also seeing this physical representation and the more like fight or flight aspect of it?
That's a good question. One that I don't know if I have the answer to.
That's okay.
Like I tell students, my introduction to jiu-jitsu and my first few years were so much different than what people get now.
Yeah.
Just because of the self-defense aspect to it. And like what I tell people when I started jiu-jitsu was what I called the Wild West, because martial arts were striking arts, period.
Right.
So, when Horian basically gave me carte blanche to said, look, I go find the toughest guy you can and bring him over if he wants to fight. I'm like, wow. I mean, how many people can do that, and also to realize, because I remember I did an interview with Hiran and Henner on their YouTube channel. And Hiran was saying, I don't know how I felt about, me trying to antagonize somebody to bring them in. Right. But then he also said, but you realized that when they fought, they weren't going to get hurt. They were going to get their ass kicked, but they weren't going to get hurt. And that's right. What happened.
As to not worry about like the repercussions.
That's right.
Yeah.
Although they're in there, everyone, when they start out, they just kind of shadow and
right.
And all of a sudden, when he clinches and goes underneath, everyone, it gets a little faster and a little faster and a little faster. And the guy's going, okay, this is bullshit. And then, they start, doing their thing. So when I saw that, I was just like, wow. I mean, you develop confidence just from watching him. And I remember when I went to, early on, we went to Benny Urquidez's school out in the valley. And this is early 80s, where Benny says to Horian, he said, look, what you do is really good, but I don't think it's the art. I think it's you. And Horian goes, no, it's the art. Richard, go put your gi on. And I was just like, put my gi on. I have like less than a year experience, and how much in that year did I spend in the clinch, covering
right.
up.
Yeah.
So when he says, go ahead and do that, and then I clinched the person and pulled him down, it was just like, okay, I didn't get knocked out. That was my biggest concern, is that the guy was going to see me coming in, and I didn't have a whole lot of technique, but he didn't know what to expect. He was watching the thing with Benny and Horian, but he didn't have any idea because they were starting against. I started here like this, and Horian said, look, when I say go, just shoot. Cover up and shoot. And I clinched, and then they stopped it because he said, look, it doesn't matter what happens next. He didn't get knocked out, and that's who your art is. Your art is a stand-up.
Totally. So, and in the application of that, I mean, let's say you're a father, you're walking around with your family and you have a little kid, and someone comes and they accost you, they try to attack you or something like that, and maybe you're the smaller guy. And so it's not a situation where you're trying to roundhouse kick the guy in the face, but you can get in the clinch, get down to the ground, and then wait. And you can hold and defend yourself while somebody else arrives, while other bystanders notice and come in. I mean, that aspect of it is not one that you really think about too often in the rolling environment of the technique and rolling. But this ability to prolong, which jiu-jitsu is really good at. If you can trap, David Ruiz is, in my eyes, the master of this, right? I'm fortunate enough to learn from him about trapping. But he will trap your arm, and it scrambles your brain, because everything that you thought you knew about what you were going to do next now doesn't work, and you have to plan B. But that could take 3 minutes. That could take 5 minutes. And that's amazing. That's huge. That's the ability between protecting your loved ones or not by not even doing anything aggressive. It's by doing something tactical. And that's, how much could you pay for that, right? It's invaluable.
Yeah. The last couple weeks I've been going over punch block from the guard. Mm-hmm. On the bottom, someone's throwing punches. And a couple different scenarios. One is just defending different positions. And I'll tell them, I say, guys, usually one of the things that's stuck in my mind is what Henner calls, I think, the 110-second rule. And it's anywhere from 60 to 90, maybe to 100 seconds or so, where if someone's barraging you, you have to defend. You have to let them get their aggression out. And you're not doing this by being offensive. You're doing this by being defensive. First thing I said was the most important part of jiu-jitsu is defense. So I said, if you can just be in that position. So I was going over the different things from the guard. I said, you're not going to, if you get a possible up kick, if the person comes up, fine, you have an opportunity. But other than that,
don't count on it.
that's right. I mean, other than that, you're not going to try to get into a punching scenario when someone's on top throwing punches, just simply because of gravity and because they might be bigger than you.
Right.
So I said, so you do this for the first minute or so. And then I showed a couple finishing moves. But when you do the finishing move itself, I said, it's what should usually come from the Kimura or the triangle. And I says, it's still, if you set up the triangle and you go for it the way they're being taught in sports schools, remember, someone's got an arm free, they're going to be trying to punch you. So I said, you have to think of that, so there's so many aspects, because one guy was doing it last night. He goes, Richard, what about if I trap the arm like this? So whenever someone says that, and I says, show me. I don't just sit there and want to see what you do. I want to feel what you're doing. So this guy has started his jiu-jitsu with me, I think, at least 2 plus 2.5 years maybe. And he's a pretty good blue belt. He's gotten very good, and he's learned to calm. Anyways, so I put me in the triangle, and I said, hold my arm the way you were talking about. And he held my arm. I said, do you have it good? That's the one thing that Jorge always said. It's like, put them,
are you ready?
Let them, that's right. Let them put you in this position so you can, I said, he goes, yeah. I said, are you sure? Yeah. So as soon as he held my arm like that, I got my arm up really easily, and I was right in his face. And I said, look, a palm strike in your nose, it's done.
Done.
Your triangle means nothing to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Hoyler, I attended one of Hoyler's seminars he did recently in San Marcos last year, and we did a lot of the Gracie combative upright stuff, which was
right, stand up.
I wish that we did. I wish we did it more. I can see why we do a lot more rolling, but anyway, I mean, we do enough of it. And after that seminar, I was talking with one of our brown belts, Steve, and he's like, "Look, we're gonna do a round, like basically between like a flow roll and a roll. So let's give it 60-70%." He's like, "But we're gonna allow light open hand contact." And I was like, this is another one of those moments in my journey of jiu-jitsu where like everything that I thought I knew just got flipped upside on its head. So we're going, and he's like, if I can just, he's like, remember this. And he is a ex-pro Bellator fighter. So the guy's a monster, right?
Mm-hmm.
He goes, if I can touch your face, I can punch you in the face. If I can touch anywhere on your body, I can punch you there, elbow there, knee there. So as we go, it took all my years of relaxation and calm and pragmatism and everything, and it just destroyed it on a second. It made me tense. It made me looking for the opportunity of what to do next, of how to block myself, because I had never thought about protecting myself in this situation. And it was just the introduction of very light slaps to the forehead, the side of the neck. And it showed me in that moment, even within the framework of jiu-jitsu, there's a difference between rolling around with your buddies and doing rounds and then protecting yourself from getting attacked by someone. And if someone is above you and they are throwing punches at your face, you have to protect yourself. And you don't protect yourself in that situation by going for a key lock or doing a triangle. It's not the most applicable way to do it, right? If you're lucky enough to get something like that or an up kick, fantastic, and do it and run. But the ability to block a punch and to frustrate the opponent and buy yourself time, it's very, very different. We did another one where same exact thing, but we had someone was doing a knife defense class, and so he just placed a plastic knife, a fake knife, about 3 feet away from us. And he's like, if one of us gets the knife, the round ends and we start again. Just to, again, think about the difference between training, rolling, and then rolling in a hypothetical real-life situation. And it's terrifying. I mean, it's completely different. Just having that object there, pretending in my head that it's sharp and life-threatening against someone who's more skilled and larger than me, terrifying. It was in those moments that I was like, wow, the self-defense, it's valuable for me. It's valuable for everybody. Knowing how to change the dynamics in that situation, if that's a real knife, that's life or death. That's not just play.
Yeah, for sure.
It's crazy.
Yeah, definitely. The aspect of punching or having that ability, it changes the perspective. And sometimes I almost get the sense that some of the students, like, not all, but there's a few that just like, almost like, show us some technique, show us how to finish. And I said, which I show plenty of. And I'm a very foundational. I have a couple purple belts, a couple blue belts, maybe 5, and then a lot of white belts. My specialty has been taking that person that knows nothing and getting them where after a couple of years, whether they get a blue belt or not, they have fundamentals. They have like foundational stuff, because Bruce Lee, I think it was Bruce Lee that said a long time ago, would you rather know 1,000 kicks and practice it one time, or one technique and practice it 1,000 times? And I tend to show less moves, but the moves that I show, after a while, you own those moves. Yeah. And those are the moves, the most basic kind of combative type of movements that they'll be part of you. Mm-hmm. And that to me is one of the most important things, because as we age, see, the thing is, are you in your 30s?
33.
Okay. It changes. I tell them, I said, look, even if you're a big, strong guy, I said, eventually, if you stay in this long enough and you want to keep on the mat, you're going to have to change the way you roll.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about your body's surviving. Here I'm going to be 71 in a couple months. And I said, right now, jiu-jitsu, I'm thinking about, if I get in a confrontation, I just want to walk away.
Right.
I just want to be able to defend myself and seriously walk away. And because of the last 2 years, my attitude, because some things, in Santa Monica, there's almost sometimes it's kind of lawlessness. There's a lot of homeless.
That's right. I was right on 2nd in California for 3 years before moving down here. So the heart of the pandemic, when that hit, my fiance, who's from down south here in Carlsbad, we were kind of like, what do we want to do? And it was so wild for a couple weeks there, and the residual effects in that area, it's devastating, because I trained at the Equinox on 2nd in Santa Monica for like 6 years. That whole street right there, right next to the promenade. I went up to visit friends a couple weeks ago. Businesses still 3 years later in prime time Santa Monica, downtown, like excellent retail real estate, closed up. It just devastated that area, and it did leave this lasting effect there. It is a little bit like shaky sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I live maybe from the promenade, maybe I live over by Rose and Mayn.
Yeah.
So I live in as far as Santa Monica. If you go out my door and you turn left, you're in Venice.
Wow, this is weird. We were neighbors for a while.
Yeah.
Then that's interesting, because I lived on 5th and Rose in Venice. So that, the street then by Justa and Gold's Gym, that little strip there.
Oh.
You have to honestly be a little bit on your guard when you walk by that area, because you don't know. Someone literally, they'll jump out and hit you with a skateboard. I've seen some crazy stuff happen live with my own eyes, and it's interesting talking about this. Like, for me, that's almost the application of all this stuff, because if I have the itch to compete, like you said in your book, go compete, and I will. I enjoy that aspect of it. But the reason, the deep down reason, is that if for some reason I was walking down the street and some lunatic hit me in the back with a skateboard or something, I want to have just enough knowledge to handle my protecting myself in that situation. Not to go out and look for altercations outside of a contest setting, but to be able to be confident in my abilities that if something happened, I would be safe.
Because of what's happened over the past 2 years, I ran into a former student of mine at Costco a couple years ago, and we were talking about the kind of craziness that's going on, especially back then, when the riots were and and he told me, he says, Richard, he said, I carry a knife. And I said, interesting. So he had a little lanyard around his neck, and he had a little knife there, and then he had a knife in his pocket. And I said, I think I might do that. So I bought a little, 12-inch, I bought a little 3-inch blade.
You open your jacket up and you have like all the different.
This is a knife, mate.
Yeah.
And
that's a Crocodile Dundee reference for everyone listening who doesn't know what that movie is. Go look it up and watch it.
Yeah. Anyways, and I've never had to pull it out. And I also, when I walk, I have this little 11-ounce glass Perrier bottle that I refill with water. I don't like using plastic, so I come over, I fill my bottle up, and I keep it in my back pocket. So I feel, if nothing else, so if I get attacked, I'm not going to ask them if they want a drink of water. Maybe after I knock them out, I'll spill what's left on them.
Well, that's the funny thing about and look, I love training. I love going in and rolling. I love training hard with certain people, and I love training less hard with other people. But you can't attach yourself to the idea that if you get into it somewhere in life, whether it's something that you provoke or something that happens to you, it will not start by somebody slapping hands and sitting cross-legged on the ground. It's not how it's going to go down, right? So it's this, you have to remember while you're doing this, that's how you begin, out of like respect for the training environment, the dojo, training with your teammates or your, whoever else is in there. That's how you start. It's a mutual agreement that now we are going to begin practicing with each other. That's not how it happens out there, right? You want to know how to stand up. If you're pushed up against the wall, you need to know how to drive their hands across their face and clench and change the position. Like, these things are really valuable. And it is one thing I do really like about what Hoyler and Gracie Humaita is doing with reinstating the combatives aspect, is that here's something that's applicable for everyone all the time, because we don't hop around on our butts, right? We walk around standing. So if anything happens, it's going to start there, unless someone trips and they fall and land cross-legged on the ground, right? Yeah. So remembering that the stand-up, even if your school offers striking or anything that is stand-up based, it's just another element to the bag of martial arts that's so valuable if your intentions lie within self-defense. Knowing that in the back of your pocket, jiu-jitsu is still the creme de la creme when it comes down to it, right? Because it equalizes size and athleticism. Whereas if you're in a standing match with someone only, that can be a big disadvantage. When you're back in the academy, the original academy, and you're with Horian, Rickson obviously has this separate amazing career going on in the physical representation of jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts together, right? In Japan and in Vale Tudo and in the United States, and his school also. So there's these two very different representations of their family's art form in the public sphere at the same time. What were your feelings towards everything that Rickson represented against everything that, well, not against, but alongside everything that Horian represented for you at that time?
I'll answer your question, but I wanted to finish like the thought that I had.
Yes,
When I
please.
said I carried a knife, because I never really want to use a knife, and I didn't want to have to get close to somebody. I was looking for the perfect weapon, because when I walked, I mean, I got harassed when I went for a walk, and I wanted to be able to walk in my neighborhood. So
Laser
I bought
gun.
a flashlight with a stun gun on it. Still, you have to get close and touch somebody.
Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
going, what can? And then I was contemplating a concealed carry. And one of my students is a purple belt firearms instructor. He said, Richard,
Not in LA.
don't do it. He says, because if you have to use that, man. And I went like, I agree.
Okay.
And then he said, get pepper gel or a pepper spray, a good one, because you can hit it from 15 feet away, and you'll incapacitate somebody, and you can walk away. You don't have to touch them.
Right.
So I remember what Horian said. All those things are great, and I remember what Henner says. If you have something to de-escalate, well, I'm going to do my best to de-escalate, but I don't want to, at 70 years old, come in and have a confrontation with a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old or a 20-year-old just because of what it's going to do. I want to stop it before it even happens. So I found in me the perfect self-defense weapon, because it's easy to use. Take it out, back off. They don't back off. They can't see. They can't fight.
Right.
So because I didn't want to use a knife, I didn't want to have to hit somebody, but I have no problem if you're coming at me. And I had about a month ago, I left town, and before I left, there was a guy out in my alley, and he looked at me and he said, I'll fuck you up. And I'm like, really? And I had my pepper spray, and I went like, he started moving toward me, and my security door was right there, and I said, I didn't want to go through the hassle. Let the guy walk. I just opened the door, walked away. It's like, I can't emphasize this enough to students. I said, you do not want to fight,
I mean, even that, maybe that's a real life representation of your mastery, right? Of getting, who knows, how does Richard Bresler handle that at 28 years old, right? No idea. Maybe completely differently. Maybe more locked up and afraid in the situation that you don't think to leave, or you don't know what it has taught you in how to even be in that situation, see what's happening, go, you know what, not today. My door's right here. To even see your door, right? Because you're not overwhelmed with nerves and adrenaline and panic, and then leave. It's that's an invaluable lesson, probably from hours of time training and being in that environment.
Yeah. Okay.
But okay, so back to
they what they did, they didn't really have anything that was, by the time that they had their split, I was with Horian and Hickson was doing his thing. They were still doing the jiu-jitsu. Maybe they weren't focusing on the stand-up self-defense enough, but Hickson always attracted, or mostly attracted, the younger athletic kind of guys. Mm-hmm. And Horian was always focusing on the business, the professional type. In other words, just to say that, you never know what you're going to, I guess that there wasn't really a conflict because, back in Brazil, they taught a certain way, but they were also putting their art to challenge. I mean, when Hickson fought Zulu and when Eliu fought earlier, I mean, they were putting their art to the challenge at all the time. But it was just part of like what they were saying, jiu-jitsu is the most effective art. And that's what it was back then. And people say, well, would you still choose jiu-jitsu? And I said, of all basic arts that I would choose, that I've seen them, I said I would still choose jiu-jitsu. Doesn't mean that wrestling's not good. Doesn't mean that Muay Thai is not good. And I see some of these guys on Facebook and Instagram and how fast they are, and they're doing all these little fancy moves. That's not the art. It is the person that has mastered that art. When I see some of these guys, I just saw some Bruce Lee's protege, some old video of this guy. It takes a long time to master, and you have to have some kind of a physical attribute to do that. So they still had the premise: you don't have to be athletic to be able to defend yourself.
And I think that's a big differentiating factor. And as someone who's studied movement for basically my whole life and done it as a career, it's a big difference when you don't have to have athleticism to be proficient. You know, wrestling, you need to be athletic to out wrestle your opponent.
Yeah.
Go to any jiu-jitsu academy in the country, in the world, and you will find a person who's so small that you wouldn't notice them when you walk in, and they will be capable, if they're more skilled higher belt, of dominating someone of greater size. I mean, David Ruiz is, again, another good example. David is a small guy soaking wet, not the heaviest person in the world. He gives big people very hard times, right? And David is wisely, selective of who he'll train with, and some days he doesn't roll with us, and some days it's just instruction. But seeing it happen changes your perspective of what you think the art's capable of. I don't think that, and perhaps this is my ignorance showing through, I don't think that you could go into a D1 wrestling academy and see someone in their 50s give a hard time to someone in their 20s.
Right.
Even if you said, okay, well, let's say the 50-year-old's an ex-world class wrestler, and the person who's 25 and just got a D1 scholarship is not as talented. I don't know for sure, but I don't think that that's going to go very well. You know, jiu-jitsu does equalize that field, and I think that's what makes it so special. Is it just changes what you think is possible when you see it happen, and you don't really know until you see it happen, and you see it in action, which is such a great name for the tapes anyway. Like, even if you go back and watch some of those, it's all grainy footage and it's kind of funky, and it's an interesting setting, but you're watching something spectacular happen for the first time ever.
Yeah.
And that's incredible.
For sure. I mean, it's, you said something about wrestling, and one of the things that I have seen with a lot of the physicality, the sportive aspect of jiu-jitsu, where guys are just, they want to compete. And after they do this, if that's the way they approach jiu-jitsu, one of two things happen. They usually get burnt out and quit. They can't do it for longevity because they're constantly getting injured. It's like college wrestling. They do for a short amount of time. Maybe they might do something a little bit after that, Olympics, whatever. But you're not going to see these guys into their 30s even wrestle. And that's
it's rare.
Yeah, so people are getting injured. And I tell them, I said, look, you can do jiu-jitsu, but I said, if you want to be able to last, you have to change your approach. I mean, I see these guys and I go, Richard, how did you, look, I'm going to be 71. I talk to a lot of guys that have had back, shoulder, knee, hip surgeries. I have not. One is because of the body work that I've received that's truly special, that's kept me relatively pain-free. And two, it's the approach that another thing that I'm sharing. I'll say, look, if you want to be able to be on the mat, you can't have that. I mean, I'm seeing guys right now in their 30s and into their 30s and early 40s, and they go, yeah, my body can't. I said, you have to change the way you do jiu-jitsu if you want to stay on the mat. Don't get stacked up. give up. Don't hold that triangle, when the guy's stacking up or an arm lock, and if you feel like you're going to be put on your neck, let go of it. It's not that important. I said, because truly what's the most important thing is preserving your body too. So, you use the analogy of a wrestler. Yeah. How many wrestlers in their 50s are you going to see they're even wanting to compete?
Yeah, I mean, just calling a spade in the world of sports, like sports and athletic demands are tough on the body. We're not designed to wrestle into our 50s. We're not designed mechanically to do jiu-jitsu our whole life. We're not designed to ski at a world-class level beyond, your 30s. It's just, that's the way life is. That's just something to accept. It doesn't mean that you have to give up and quit, but there is an approach, I think, that is necessary in any endeavor in life. Surfing's another example, right? I love to surf. The way that I'm surfing now at 33 is going to have to change as I get older. I accept that and I welcome it, and it'll be a journey in and of itself to be able to surf into my 60s and my 70s. And there's guys that do it all the time, right? Maybe they're not paddling into the biggest wave of the set, or they're not surfing for 3 hours, but they're finding a way to adjust their board length, how much volume's in it, what types of waves that they surf. And you would be a fool to think that you will train jiu-jitsu 15 years from now the exact same way that you are. And if you love it, like you love anything, you'll make those adjustments as you go. And one thing that one of our coaches, Steve, says, he's like, rest is a discipline, right? And this is coming from a former professional MMA fighter. That concept that you do have to be as stringent in your recovery, in your rest, in your body work, in your sauna use, in whatever things are actually fueling you to show up to the mats the same person every day, that's very, very important. And I think that for a lot of people that are showing up as like an after work or a before work, that's kind of their thing that day, and forget that there's this really other important recovery component that you have to respect. And you touched on your work with Neurosoma work, and so you were introduced to this and then practice it yourself. How integral was that discovery in your longevity on the mats?
I tell people all the time, I said, jiu-jitsu has saved my body. I mean, not jiu-jitsu, Neurosoma has saved my body. By the way, the guy that developed that is the guy that just called.
His name starts with a G.
Yeah, Greiner.
Yeah. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? What is Neurosoma in a nutshell, and what separates that from maybe some of your more traditional chiropractic or soft tissue approaches?
The best thing that someone could do is really go to neurosoma.com and read about it. But it was a technique because the guy that developed this was a former NASA engineer, and he went to chiropractic college. And his father was a chiropractor. His father because he had cluster headaches as a kid, his father messed him up, and after about the age of 13, he said, I'm not going to adjust you anymore. I'm not helping you. So Greiner started studying chiropractic, and all of a sudden, I don't know exactly, he has a book called What's Really Wrong with You, How Your Muscles Affect Your Body, something like that. And it's just how you work on this muscle. Most people, when they work a muscle, they'll try to press and they'll hold the muscle to say it's going to release. He's working on the muscle. Instead of following the muscle, he'll go, and some people will say, oh, it's cross fiber work. It's not like you're just not doing this. It's a specific fingertip technique that you go from insertion, connection, where the muscle connects, because it's muscle, tendon, joint. So if you have a problem in a joint, a lot of times you can really help that really help that joint by working on the corresponding muscle to the joint.
Right.
And so it's a nice theory. And I was introduced to it in 92. And then when the guy that introduced me to it gave me a short treatment, then he gave me his card, and he said I charge $100 an hour in 1992. I was like, well, you probably won't see me, but I kept his card, and when I got injured at teaching class, work comp covered it. He didn't want to deal with work comp for obvious reasons. I don't know if you ever dealt with work comp, but
horrible.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Horrible
So,
for all parties.
Yeah. Anyways, this guy said, was struggling for business, and he said, okay, he liked me, whatever, and he did it. And not only did he help me with the area that I hurt, but he got over to this area right through my neck and the shoulder, and he goes, this is your real problem. Because for years, I was having students that were chiropractors adjust me, sometimes 3 times a week. I could not turn my head further than this without being in pain. I always felt like I was being grabbed. And I remember he started working on me. And after about 3 months of getting these treatments in the bad area, I drove home and I went to check my, people. And I went, oh my God, I had full mobility in my neck I haven't had in years. And I used to have neck issues. And I remember that Dave Ruiz was one of the younger guys that would tell me back then, you need to strengthen your neck, Richard. So I started doing these things with a rope and, also, and all I did was tighten up my neck and made it worse. I never did a neck strengthening exercise after that. Just received this work, and my neck now is better than it was back then.
Why do you think this hasn't gained as much? Because it's quite a bit of time from your initial treatments to now, for it to not be, and maybe it is more applied in the physical therapy or chiropractic setting, but why has it not gained more traction if it seems to be so effective?
Well, you have to realize one thing. Jiu Jitsu had the UFC and also a challenge. Word of mouth, it starts to, people, maybe, put it this way. There's things that I can't tell you right now, that there's people that are just being exposed to this work right now. One of my clients introduced me to somebody and I referred to someone else because that's not what I want to do. I'll help somebody, but that's
right.
I'm a jiu-jitsu teacher. I'll do that also, but I would rather teach. And it's gaining traction. I have had like Brian, the guy that originally worked with me, was a chiropractor.
Yep. He
was struggling for clients. Well, because I was at the jiu-jitsu school, because I hadn't learned this yet, I was telling people, oh man, you got to go see this guy. All of a sudden I built Brian's practice. I mean, I really helped the guy. He goes, man, so many people now. And about 14 years ago, I had a friend of mine who had a little co-op in Venice that's gone, and he hurt his back. And one of the people said, hey, you should really go see Richard. He'll really help your back. Oh man, I've seen everybody, I've seen, whatever. Anyways, his back was in such pain. He goes, okay, I'll go see this guy. The guy comes in my hallway, takes him about 10 minutes to walk about, 50 yards. And he walks out and he goes, wow, it's not that he was healed, but he just went like, oh my God, I think you really he says, you really did something different.
Yeah.
And so the guy came back to me for 10 years. I mean, he goes, Richard, this is it. Muscles, tendons. He says, it's not adjusting. I don't want to make any enemies. I don't want any emails. But right. Remember, the guy that called me was a former chiropractor. The guy that taught me was a chiropractor who didn't do adjustments. Another person that I traded treatments with was a chiropractor who didn't do adjustments. I know 3 or 4 other people that are chiropractors that just do this treatment alone because they realized that the muscles are very important. I'm not against chiropractic. I had a chiropractic adjustment about a month ago. A guy that I met who lives up in Seattle area, I worked on his shoulder and he gave me an adjustment. I wanted to see what he did. But it's the muscles. If you adjust something, your muscles have a memory. It likes being in a certain place. So the kind of technique that this guy did was to relax the muscle. And he has a machine called the biopulsar, which he's not producing right now, which is so relaxing and it's so helpful that coupled with this technique has kept me surgery free. And I'm not saying you get fixed once. I mean, it's maintenance. I mean,
right.
We eat, it's maintenance. We shower, it's maintenance. We need to have our muscles worked on to maintain. And people go like, sometimes I felt like, well, they were doing this. I'm doing this, I'm telling you, because I need clients. I don't need clients. I don't want clients.
Right.
It's very physically demanding because I use my hands and I have pain in my hands. So I have to work on my arms just so I can see a person. I have to work on my arms. So anyways.
It's definitely something that should be maybe addressed kind of head on, like especially if you're in this for the long haul, you have to be taking care of your body. And
you have to find something.
You really do. And it's not just true for jiu-jitsu, it's true for everything else.
Everything.
Right? If you're a runner, you need to address soft tissue. If you're a wrestler, especially. But if you just do jiu-jitsu and hope that jiu-jitsu will hurt and heal you, it's not going to work like that. I mean, you have to be proactive in what you're doing, and soft tissue work, and it sounds like Neurosoma are really important because, to your point earlier, if you have a problem in a joint, it's typically not the joint that has the issue. It's related from somewhere else and referred up or down the line. So people with knee issues, right, and jiu-jitsu is horrible to our knees, that's going to usually lie up closer to the hip or down towards the ankle. It's not going to be directly on the joint. So you have to have something in place. And if you don't know, try to do some research, because, I mean, this can be years, right, on the longevity of your career in this art form or just practicing it. But that's something that's equally as important as the time on the mat. Because you got to think about it from the macro view, right? Do you want to be doing this in 5 years without having neck surgery, without double hip replacement, without shoulder surgery, without tendonitis? Those are real things that are going to happen because the sport is extremely demanding on your body. You are rolling around on the ground, getting smashed around by another person. That's horrible to our bodies. So
right.
I loved reading how much of the book you did dedicate to just talking a little bit about this experience, how instrumental that was to be able to still be teaching, right, at 70 and have more years down the line that you're going to be continuing to share this with people because you're taking care of your body and you took a lot of responsibility on yourself to figure it out. It wasn't one person came by and said, oh, hey, I'll give you a treatment. And you're like, oh, cool, it's free, I'll do it. You were proactive about it. And I spend so much freaking time trying to help my body recover for the next day, even at 33, because I get it. I totally get everything you're talking about. And it was great to see that part of it was dedicated just to that. Granted, it's right up my alley, but I want people to know it is so important to recover.
Right. Well, I'll give you, because you said something. You said a person has tendonitis. Well, let's think about that for a second. If a person has tendonitis, basically anything with an itis, it's inflammation.
Right.
So where does the inflammation and the tendon come from? The tendon is attached to the muscle. Yeah. So it means you're overusing and stressing that muscle. So people say, well, traditional physical therapy, they'll tell you, well, it's because this one muscle over here is not firing. So if you take and you do the exercise, maybe you'll do an exercise and you change it, you can't strengthen one little thing thinking that you're going to get rid of an inflammation. So that's where it came to, all of a sudden you start to work on the muscle. And what this guy who I told you about, who came to me, when he first came to me, I wasn't very busy at all. I had a very rich, wealthy client who actually took me on a cruise to the Caribbean with him. And my job was just, he paid for a trip for me. And then I was his personal, and this is like 15 years ago. But when he got back, he took me to Vegas, put me up in a nice suite, and for the weekend. And I was just so I could treat him.
Provide, body work.
But the guy was kind of a rageaholic. And dealing with people like that, I didn't want, and then
his energy drain.
Yeah, and his family too. They were just very high maintenance, and I finally had to just like let them go. And I'm one like, wow. And I wasn't very busy. But this guy that I helped, because he had a little food co-op and I helped him, people, they'd go, oh man, my neck or my back. Go see Richard. Go see Richard.
Yeah.
This guy, within 6 months, I said, okay, dude, you don't have to tell people anymore. I said, please, I'm handle. I have as much business as I can handle, and I don't want more. So it's word of mouth. People are hearing about it. It's something that's really, it's valuable. I hurt myself back in 2006 where I walked with a cane for 2 months, and I had pain radiating down my hip into my toes. And I was told by different people, maybe cortisone, maybe you need a microsurgery. I never got an MRI. And I said, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I want to put it to the test. I'm only going to do this therapy. And I got past it, and so my mom broke her hip 2 years ago. At 95, I thought, well, they say at that age, after you break the hip, a person that age, they have about a year and they die. My mom now is 2 years. She's 96. She lives in Washington. I go up and visit her, and she's had pain in her hip. And I'm trying to figure it out. I go, why can't you find somebody up there, a chiropractor, a body worker, or something? I went up there. Her neck was frozen. She couldn't lift her arm up, and she had to lift her leg to get out of the car. My mom still drives, by the way, lives alone. So I worked on her.
And she's, by your group will, battled and survived cancer as well. Right?
And she has another cancer going the alternative route too, slow growing cancer. So my mom she's a warrior. But so I went up there, and I just came back. And when I was there, she said, yep, I can move my neck now. She goes, look, I can move my arm above here. And she wasn't needing to lift her leg to get out of the car. And I said, it's because, she goes, how come I'm not better yet? And I said, Mom, who knows what they cut? The nerves, the muscles, whatever. And so I would work on my mom's hip just to get her out of pain for a certain amount. And it breaks my heart because when I moved her out of here, because I thought Washington would be a better place because my sister lives up there. And frankly, I didn't think my mom was going to be around this long. And I said, if she needs help, it'll be best. And now, so anyways, I'm going back up there again. And she's seeing someone else, hopefully to try to help her. But the work has done a great job, and there's a few people that do this. If it gets really popular, we're going to be overwhelmed with work, because the people that I know have pretty full schedules right now doing this, because there's not enough people doing this, because the guy who developed it is a little
eccentric.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Typically, with the alternative health medicines, I think it's one of the challenges, right? It takes an open mind to think of an alternative. That's part of the prerequisite of a lot of open-minded thinking. To come up with a non-Western medicine approach to something, it takes an open mind. A lot of times the people that have that open mind and the genius alongside it produce a pretty eccentric character that's hard to get a lot of people behind. It's just kind of,
There you go.
It's the rub, and it's a challenge. But the good news, I think, for offerings like that is that if you can take someone from pain to pain-free, there is no more profound experience for someone living to go through. If you can't move your neck and someone frees that freeze, that's crazy. You think it's all you can think about. It blows your mind. When you have something that's painful and you go in for a treatment of something, and the person, by performing what appears to be snake oil, fixes it, it's so memorable. And that's why the word of mouth does spread so quickly with these things, because it's pain to pain free. It's not like personal training where you take someone from baseline to stronger, or unable to move to more movement proficient. Those are all subjective to their emotions. Maybe they're excited about fitness that day, and so they like it. Maybe they're bummed out and they don't want to work out, so none of it means anything to them. But if someone has a busted knee and you make it not busted, and they didn't even have to go under the knife, it's a game changer. That's why soft tissue work is so... It's kind of like way in the outfield for a lot of people, which is ironic in a place like jiu-jitsu where it's almost entirely isometric, which is going to create tons of tension and inflammation near the joints. And so we all have busted fingers and knees and ears and elbows, and yet people aren't putting... Exactly. No one's putting emphasis on taking care of the muscles that are doing all the contractions in all the positions anyway.
Right. And realize one thing. Depending, because I don't want anyone to think this is a quick fix. I still get treated, and because I've been doing something for the last 40 years, and I have developed some certain chronic situations. I mean, if you look at my spine, you'll go like, whoa. But the main thing is, and I'm not saying I'm going to correct anyone's spine, but I'm out of pain, and that's the thing. It's not so much. If you're young enough and you're not chronic enough, you can get the body to be a certain way. But it's more important if it's chronic. People they might do have a chronic thing and then come and try 5 visits and they go, it didn't work for me. I go, wait a second. You really have to give it a chance, because you have a chronic thing. Chronic that's built up for years. That's like saying go in and take 5 jiu-jitsu classes and go into the UFC. Let me know how you do.
Yeah, horribly. And that's why, that's why people struggle so much to make changes in nutrition, because you can't just go on a crash diet and change your habits for 40 years. This is psychological hardwiring that predisposes you to make bad choices about food, right?
Yes.
You're not, the overweight person who wants to get in better shape isn't consciously choosing all of the bad food that they're eating. And that's a big misconception, I think, that a lot of people in the training space have, is that, you just need to, harden down your choices, choose better. Dude, it's so much more complicated than that. It is addiction, just with food, not substance. It's the same psychological hardwiring that challenges that person to make the right choice, even if the right choice is there. For Richard, when Richard was doing cocaine and drugs and trying to not do that, you could have all the best choices in front of you. You could live with Horry and Gracie, who's not doing any of that, who's hand pressing apple juice in the morning. And it can literally be in the same room as you, and you're going to make the wrong choice, because psychologically, that's the way that your brain is wired in that moment. And I think people need to understand, to make a change, which is why jiu-jitsu is so beautiful. It's so long. It takes 15 years to get your black belt. That's a big commitment. For a lot of people that are starting, that's more than half their life that they've been alive, right? And for some of us that are getting into it later, that's a big chunk of time. And so if you can wrap your head around that type of scale, then maybe some of the other things will start to make sense. And I wanted to ask you about that, because I was thinking a lot about your journey towards reducing drug use and finding more frequency of jiu-jitsu, but there was a big period where it seemed like those things were overlapping. So you had habits and behaviors in your life that you vocally didn't want to be there anymore, but they still were. At the same time that you're also increasing your frequency of this art and the lessons from Horian and the day-to-day changes in kind of how life is going. What was that process like in the transition away from those behaviors that you were recognizing, but before that they were realized?
Well, I didn't realize this was going to be so deep.
That's what happens on here.
Hang on a second.
Yeah. That was good. That was good.
You know, I was, one of the things that I say in like the book, it says how Gracie Jiu Jitsu saved my life. Jiu Jitsu had to do with changing my life. But one of the things I didn't know that would happen is when Horian and I became roommates, he had talked to me, 6 months before about probably look, the very first class he told me about, he made me a fresh glass of, watermelon juice, which was like amazing. And then after that time when we're in when I'm crying in my car and he says, I want you to think about what you're putting in your body, he was planting seeds, and then, I'd said to him something, I remember like what my response was, what does it matter what I put in my body? I'm just going to go home and do drugs anyhow. And then he responded, well, that's the reason why. You've got to give yourself a chance. Anyways, so months later, I'm moving with Horian, and I feel he just says, eat meals with me. So I started eating meals. Every single meal, a lot of the meals we ate together. And I saw he was doing stuff, having papaya with dates and whatever, and, a lot of fruit back then, which I'm not a big fruit advocate anymore. But I started changing. I just started eating with him. And I was being programmed. I was developing new habits just because I was living with him. Where the average person would come in and say, have a meal with Horian, and they go home and do their thing.
Right. They're not getting that exposure.
That's right. So after a year's time, I remember after 4 months, I think it was 4 or 5 months, and I think I referred to, I was a Twixaholic.
Yeah.
And I literally would walk into whatever the store was back in the market, and every single time I would get a Twix candy bar. It was just, and I remember the first time that I walked by them and I went and I noticed them and I didn't grab one. And I went, huh, because I had dates. Yeah. And so, then I would go in the store, a couple weeks later, and a couple more days would go by. I wasn't grabbing a Twix. I slowly stopped drinking Coca-Cola. I stopped doing all these other little things. And I was just like, wow. So, but I was developing. I was in a very unique situation. And then after a year of living with Horian, and then when Hiran was born, just before he was born, he asked me, to move out because, we had a 2-bedroom house and him and Suzanne and Hiran, it wouldn't work out. Yeah. So even when I went up the street, I moved from Hermosa to North Redondo, and I was still doing drugs, but I was eating a certain way, and they weren't, and my goal was to be healthy. I kind of wanted to be healthy. And then I realized, without realizing it, drugs have no place in your life if you want to be healthy. They're not conducive to each other.
Right.
So a few more months go by, no more Quaaludes, no more cocaine. Still smoke pot, but pot didn't take me out of my head. If anything, it put me back into my head.
Right.
But and it probably, after I met Dr. Dossi, and all of a sudden something clicked. I don't know what the heck he did to me, but he did a number on my head. And I remember all of a sudden I stopped smoking pot. I was like, how the hell did this happen? But
And was it like a cold turkey from then on?
well, the Quaaludes and cocaine were slowly, I stopped. But then the pot, I slowed down, I wouldn't get, because I mean, I used to wake up to a bong every day. I mean, that was my habit for years.
Is it strange how the stigma around, I mean, you think about like marijuana in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and 90s, and you've been able to witness its entire narration change, and to look back on that, even kind of the way you write about it, it's grouped in with the other things, right? It's like Quaaludes, cocaine, pot, they're all kind of the same ilk of problem. But now you look around today, I mean, you can walk down Santa Monica, you buy weed down the street. Is it strange knowing the effect that those substances were having on your life, and then watching in real time as the perception of them changes?
Yeah, well, see, I'm not like, I really think that cocaine and Quaaludes had no place. I don't feel the same about pot. I have a student of mine who started with me at the Gracie Academy, and now is a black belt years later, and he actually runs, grows, and dispenses legally. Has a cannabis, sells CBD and THC, and and I've used the tincture, the CBD THC tincture. I won't do it like I used to do it back then, because I did it to get high, but I wanted to see any medicinal effects. I wanted to see the effect on sleep. So I might do a little bit, but it's not like I walk around going, dude, like
I mean, waking up and hitting a bong is very different than having a little bit of some tincture for like recovery purposes. Just like the visual image of the dude who rolls out of bed and just clears a bong, and then the guy who's like dropping, herbs in his mouth. Yeah, two very different people.
Yeah, but it was people. They can't believe that was me when I tell them. They go, "What, Mr. Straight Lace, Mr. Organic grass-fed beef and organic food, and don't drink Coke anymore, and don't have French fries, and don't eat the standard American diet." I mean, this was you? Like, it's just, I
wonder though, in those situations, like, so my father's been sober for 10 years. This is his 11th year from alcohol. And it was interesting reading this part about like how much Horian impacted you to change without telling you that you had a problem, without telling you that you needed to change, just kind of being an example around you, letting Richard be Richard, letting Richard make mistakes and recognize that he didn't want to, because it was very opposite of my experience with my father when I was younger, where I was always trying to get him to quit. I was trying to tell him he had a problem. It was all active, me to him. And it never worked. And it wasn't until he decided on his time, based on a bunch of factors, that it was time to stop. And it was such a profound stop. It was done. Cold turkey, done 11 years ago. And it was really interesting reading about you going through this process of knowing that you didn't want to be doing it anymore, having this good example in your life who wasn't, but also wasn't really pressuring you to change. And then I wondered, because my dad's an insane CrossFit athlete, total addict of fitness now. Do you think that personality, that addictive personality infatuated with drugs and partying, like replicated itself in the world of jiu-jitsu, and you became obsessed about the art itself?
No.
Not at all.
It just, one, I loved doing jiu-jitsu. There was something about, Horian's enthusiasm was very infectious. Mm-hmm. My enthusiasm is very, I can't tell you of all the years later when I've seen people come into places and they go, oh, you're the reason that I started jiu-jitsu. I mean, because I have that same passion for this art that he encouraged me with. So, and as far as you're talking about your dad, because we have people in our life that we want to change. We see the destructive behaviors. And one of the things that it took for me is Dr. Dossi was a huge factor, because I remember going in to see him when I was having issues with fear. And he said to me something very profound. He says, well, what do you want? And I says, well, I don't want this. I don't want that. He says, okay, good. Got it. He says, so what do you want? And I thought, wait a second. Why is this guy asking me? I just told him. Yeah. So we went back around 3 or 4 times, and he finally said to me, he says, okay, Richard, look. He says, I've asked you 3 or 4 times what you want, and all you've been able to do is tell me what you don't want. He said, that's great. I understand. Now tell me what you want. And I just kind of went, well, I said, I don't know. And he said, there you go. He says, when you figure that out, he said, then your life will start to change. It'll be that awareness. So one of the first things I thought about is, I want to be healthy. Yeah. Okay, what does it take to be healthy? Well, proper sleep, proper exercise, good diet. Some people really like, there's no room for a healthy person who ingests poisons in their body on a regular basis, which means no Coca-Cola. People go like, I'm going to hear from Coke now. I guess they don't want me, they don't want to sponsor me.
Yeah, your contract's over.
Yeah. But, so that was my goal. This is what I wanted. I want to be healthy. What does it take to become healthy? In other words, ask yourself an outcome question and keep building on that. And so if the person wants to quit something, they have to replace it. Because you can't have a negative goal. Because, I'm going to go on a diet. Okay, so what can I eat? No chocolate cake. Oh, no chocolate cake. No chocolate cake. No chocolate cake. That's what you might work for a couple days and go, God, I just want some chocolate cake.
Yeah.
So, and then how to deal with when those cravings come up, when all of a sudden, if you do say, oh God, I screwed up, whatever. It was so psychological of how you deal with your own your own challenges. I used to work with Hicks and Gracie's first wife, Kim. Her and I were really good friends. I did these rebirthing treatments, or a breathing thing, and she helped me. She said, Richard, you really need a lot of forgiveness in your life. And so I focused on forgiveness. I wrote it down. I wrote down for a month, I, Richard, forgive 70 times a day. And so when I did screw up on my diet, if I did get a craving, instead of beating myself up, all of a sudden this voice that came in said, it's okay, Richard, I forgive you. Let it go. I love you. Let it go. And that's that little voice that you learn to shut off by replacing it. You have like the little battle going on inside of you to change behavior. One of the toughest things to do. So, but it takes by setting that goal and then being easy on yourself when you're going for the goal. That's the thing. You got to be easy. You got to be loving toward yourself. And that's why I think I made a reference to the book when people go, I know I shouldn't have done that. And I'll say, don't should on me or anyone else or yourself.
It's a section. It's called Don't Should Yourself.
That's right. So.
But yeah, it's that framing, that mindset, it's so crucial. And having been a part of clients going through a weight loss journey or an overhaul in their fitness, it's very tough. And a lot of it starts with everything that you just said. It's this, when you approach it in a negative framework, you give yourself such a hill to climb instead of focusing on things that you can give yourself, adjustments that you're capable of making, and goals that are realistic within that. Like by you setting the goal to be healthier, you solved a lot of the problems. Instead of setting a goal to quit doing cocaine, a goal to quit doing Quaaludes, a goal to stop smoking weed. Now you got 15 goals and they all start with don't. As soon as you take one of those away, what are you going to give yourself? What reward are you going to get? And this happens with food all the time. People say, I want to quit eating carbs. Okay, well, that's 1/3 of the macronutrient profile. So what the hell else are you going to eat? And then if they take that away, now what? How long are you going to take that away from yourself? How about can we change our behavior around carbohydrates? Can we aim to choose more vegetables in this setting? Or is there something that you can swap on your plate for something else that you like? What things can you give yourself?
Right.
Keep giving yourself and forgiving yourself instead of stripping things away and making it harder. And that is a psychological adjustment. It's 100% a psychological change. And that's why I think a lot of the neuro-linguistic approach makes sense, because you're constantly conditioning yourself all the time based on what comes out of your mouth and what stays in your head. Because when we think, we talk to ourselves all the time, right? You're saying words in your brain.
Or seeing pictures or hearing things, something.
Totally. And if those are negative, it's going to affect how your life is. So if you can learn how to impact those, change the way that you look at them, see them through a different light. I mean, it can be the difference between being here today with this incredible story to tell in a book and thousands of lives who've changed based on being able to have been taught by you, or never getting out of your own way. And it's amazing that everything in the book is such a cool story. I really do love it. When you look into the future, what do you feel like oh my God, you have it too.
Oh, I was just plugging. It sounded like a perfect segue. By the way, he's talking about this book, guys, right here. This book, right?
If you can't see it in my screen, it's in Richard's screen. It's also in the show notes. It'll be on the Instagram. It'll be everywhere.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Now that you've destroyed my plane of thought, when you look out into the future and the next generations of Gracies, how much this sport has spread across the UFC, across all these different platforms, what do you think will maintain?
Gosh, man, that's a really nice question, and I really don't know how to. I don't know how to answer it.
Well, that's what you get for messing me up there. There's a question you can't answer. How about that?
You know what?
Yeah, what lessons do you think hold true? Yeah, or themes that you would like to see stay, because it's going to grow, right? It's going to grow. More people every year are going to keep doing jiu-jitsu, get inspired to do it. They're going to have an athlete that they look up to. They're going to see an event live. It's going to change their life. They're going to get bullied at school, and they're going to start. So it's inevitably going to continue to grow. It really does feel like combat sports, the art of jiu-jitsu, it's all in its infancy right now, really, and growing like crazy. What are your views on it?
I'm big proponents of the Gracie combatives. I mean, the way that I was taught, the guys that are, the brothers. I mean, Hickson still does that, his thing with self-defense, because even though he was a fighter, he still has focused on the self-defense aspect of it. And Hoyler and all the Gracie family. I mean, I'm close to the boys down at Gracie University, and I go down and I'll help, with classes when I'm there. And I'm attracted to that because of how they teach the self-defense aspect. And I'd like to really see that at some level, at some place, at least people having an option to help keep that alive and replicated and duplicated. You know, and I'm assuming that, you know, because Dave Ruiz is your teacher.
Yep.
Yeah, and Dave. Yeah. So Dave came from the Gracie Academy. So, and I'm assuming that the teachings that you get come from, and he follows that close enough anyhow.
Yeah.
So that kind of teaching becomes as popular as it possibly can be, because years ago when Horian, you know, when all of a sudden after the first UFC and black belts started coming up from Brazil, I went like, wow, there's so many guys. And I thought that everybody was being taught the same way I was. And I thought when Horian would say, oh, Richard, they really, he would kind of like criticize. And I thought he was criticizing to keep the students at the academy. And he was criticizing because for the same thing that I found out when I went into different schools and I watched black belts teach, I went like, yikes. Guys are learning. I was taught at a certain level. So, when you're taught by the best, you think everybody is being taught like that.
Yeah. You don't
have anything compared
like
to it. Yeah, it's not like that. So when I see it, and I just kind of like went, wow, that's why this one guy that was a black belt now, who started with me, followed me to Beverly Hills Jiu Jitsu. When I left Beverly Hills Jiu Jitsu, we lost contact. He went over and trained with the Machados, and then he moved up, ended up at Paragon, where he is right now in Central California. And he contacted me a couple of years ago, and he said, Richard, are you still doing Jiu Jitsu? I said, yeah. This is why I'd like to, come down and take a private with you. And frankly, I barely remembered the guy. And he's a black belt. And I said, how old are you?
Steve Maxwell.
No, Steve is my age.
Oh, I was like...
And I'm friends with Steve.
Gotcha.
But this guy is Central California. I go, how old are you? He goes, I'm 45. I'm going, okay, look, first of all, I said, I'll have to tell you one thing right now. I'm not sparring with you. And he goes, I don't want to, because the guy's 45 years old.
You're like, I'll pepper spray you.
Yeah, I'll pepper spray you, dude. He's 175, 80 pounds. So here he's 30 years younger or so. These headphones are really starting to bother me.
No, we're good. Yeah.
Okay. So 30 years younger, 40 pounds heavier, and he's a black belt. And I'm going like, dude. And he goes, look, I'm not coming down to spar. I want you to teach me the way you taught me back then. So he came down and it's like he took the group class the night before and he had a private with me. And he goes, this is what I want. We went over the self-defense. We went over the Kimura. He was just like, I said, show me how you do it. And then I did it. And he goes, wow. He said, that's what I'm missing. So it's the little things like that. I had a student that come to me after the book, just people who contact me because they read my book. A black belt and a purple belt came in and took a private class from me. And again, I said, look, dude, I'm not here to spar. And they go, Richard, it's like I have to get out of my head because, these guys are, let's say, close to half my age. Yeah. One guy is 240. The black belt, third degree black belt's 240. The purple belt was 185. And I said, and they said, look, so I came down, they had a class with me, a private class. I taught them the collar choke. I taught them the rear naked choke. And I taught them the triangle the way I do it. And their minds were blown. And they said, can we do this again? Because I thought, you're going to do this. And I said, yeah, we can do it again. Because they just wanted to see the essence without using power. Everybody has this thing. I said, you don't have to impress me. I just want to see what you do. Right. How can I gauge? Like when I went to Horian's office 5 years ago, he said, show me the collar choke. He goes, almost perfect. I'm going like, dude, you showed me the collar choke. And he took my second hand and he pushed it back a little further. And he goes, now you got it. And that's what I do is I'm taking what you already know and it's showing you how to make it a little better. That's what I want to do. I want to help people have the essence of jiu-jitsu to make it just that little, because we need to get more technical. As we lose our strength and speed, all we have left is our technique. So that's what
Wise words, man.
Yeah, so
Richard.
Anyways, this was supposed to be an hour and a half.
I know. I feel bad for your ears and everything, but honestly, thank you.
Do I get paid overtime for this?
You do, yeah. We'll
Okay,
get you a bonus here, and we'll plug the book. I really do appreciate you taking 2 hours. This is a conversation that is special, and I'll never forget. And I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I could talk for 6, but I get
could
sick
without
of being
these.
in the chair. Yeah, it's the chair. I can't be in the chair longer than like 2 hours. It's kind of my limit. But
yeah.
thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.